All right, Maura. So thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the realm of mental health.
Name is Maura, Maura Winter, if anybody's curious. It's out there on the internet for anybody to see. Um, I am a mental health counselor in Washington. I have been practicing since 2020. So I graduated during the midst of the pandemic, and that led me to doing telehealth practice. So that's all that I do right now. Um, I got so I didn't take a traditional path to getting into mental health. I always knew that it was something that I was interested in. And to be 100% honest, it was my backup plan. I actually have my bachelor's in music, my bachelor's in musical arts. But when I was a senior, I kind of had a moment of crisis and I realized that I did not want to go into music professionally. So I started volunteering at like mental health facilities in my area, um, working with folks who had what we consider to be more chronic long-term mental health conditions. And from there, I applied to graduate school for counseling and became a counselor.
Yeah, that's a pretty unique path. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and to be honest, it's not as unique. Well, at least in the program that I went to, it wasn't as unique as it sounds. There were a lot of people in the program who this was a second career for them. I went to a school that's pretty close to the military base there in Tacoma. So we had a lot of folks that were transitioning out of the military who wanted to go back and become counselors. Um, so it was actually in the minority in my program for people to be coming like straight out of a psychology program
Hmm.
into graduate school.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the work that you do as a counselor. What's your role?
Therapists love this question. You'll get a million different answers. So I do individual counseling. Um, I do, like I said, I do all telehealth right now, and that's just because that's what works for me and works for my business and my personal life. Um, I started out as kind of a generalist, went and worked in community mental health, and there I got to see a lot of different people. Um, my role is a supportive role. So um, I want to help people get where they want to go. I want people to help people figure out what their goals are, figure out what they feel like they're not happy with in their life. That's the more general overview. More specifically, I have started specializing in work with people who have OCD. Um, I work with a lot of people who have various anxiety disorders, whether that's kind of just a general anxiety or the anxiety and stress of big changes in their life. But I would say about 60% of the work I do right now is work with OCD. And in that work, I use a particular approach that is kind of the first line counseling approach for OCD, which is called exposure and response prevention. There are other approaches, so people should know that. But that is where I've decided to start off, and I feel like it's really helpful for people. It's a little different than other talk therapy that people
Hmm.
are used to.
Yeah. So what I was going to ask is what are the components of OCD for those that don't know, since you work in that?
Yeah, yeah. OCD, when I think about it in comparison with other disorders, so there's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, also shortened, some people know it DSM-5, revised edition currently. But luckily for us, OCD has a lot fewer diagnostic criteria than other disorders. So if somebody is coming to me and they're wondering if they have OCD, we're looking for two things. One, a lot of thoughts, intrusive thoughts that are distressing to them. So intrusive thoughts are not just random urges or weird thoughts. They're persistent. They are hounding you. You can't get them out of your mind. Sometimes they're bizarre, but other times they're pretty reasonable. So, what I mean by reasonable is they're things that everybody has thought about at one time or another. Is this relationship right for me? Am I safe? Uh, is this a good time to make this decision, right? Other times they're a little bit more unusual. And what I mean by that is they're not logically connected. So if I don't, if I uh, take, if I make my coffee in a different way than I normally do in the morning, I'm going to have a bad day. Or if I make my coffee in a different way than I normally do, someone in my family might die, right? So sometimes they're bizarre, sometimes they're reasonable. So that would be the intrusive thoughts that we're looking for. On the flip side of it, the second thing I'm looking for is what do you feel like you have to do about that? So compulsions are things that you do in order to escape uh, the distress that comes about because of the intrusive thoughts. So intrusive thoughts are usually really distressing. So that's another thing that I'm looking for. And sometimes that's disgust, sometimes it's anxiety, panic, fear, sometimes it's anger. And then compulsions are anything that people do to get rid of that. They feel like they have to do. So I use the coffee example. That would be I have to make my coffee the exact same way. If I do it wrong, I have to start over to the point where sometimes people can get stuck doing things either repetitively or in a particular way um, over and over and over again. So the third component is that those first two things have to take up a considerable amount of time or cause a lot of disruption in your life. So I look at disruption as anything being, I'm just not happy, all the way to I can't, I can't work a job, I can't have relationships, I can't go to school, or I feel like I'm working two full-time jobs. Because a lot of people with OCD are actually really uh, they're over functioning. They are working jobs. They are in relationships. Sometimes not, but they're usually able to do those things, but they are exhausted by them. So that's a quick and dirty overview of
Hmm.
what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So, but like in the therapy room, how do you sort of help clients with OCD? What's sort of the method that you sort of use to sort of say, hey, here's some ways to sort of help deal with this?
Yeah, my approach is exposure. So exposure is uh, literally just that. I don't know that there's any other word, but it's exposing yourself to the triggers of those thoughts and fears. In in the therapy room, it's done methodically. We discuss it, we make decisions, we say, hey, what are we gonna do? Let's try it. And then my role as a therapist, once we have figured out what we're gonna do and somebody's okay exposing themselves to that trigger, is I provide support in then focusing on the fear, focusing on the feeling that you're having, because there are two things that can happen. You are able to, uh, if you're able to interact with these fears, um, and resist any of those actions that usually help you to escape that or lessen that distress. If you face the fear head on, we see a significant reduction in the control that that fear has over somebody. So in the therapy room, I'm helping people figure out what are the exposures we're going to do. I'm helping them troubleshoot as we go through an exposure. And then I'm also there just to be a support. Like that's more my personality though. That's more my uh, particular approach is I'm pretty tenacious. Like I'm not scared. I think that because OCD is so intense and so scary, I'm trying to help people see, like, I'm trying to inspire that in them because it is really scary and the work is really, really hard. And so a big part of what I do is provide that human connection and that that support.
Yeah, because oftentimes, the people with OCD, they don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do, how to deal with their whatever they're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like a lack of education, even in the mental health realm. Um, if I'm completely honest, I didn't get much training about recognizing, diagnosing, or treating OCD as part of my initial training. Um, and that's because it is a specialty area. There are a couple of areas in mental health that usually require more advanced training coming out of school. So trauma is one of them. Um, uh, Eating disorders is one where usually you have to seek out specialty care. And then OCD is definitely one of those because people just don't necessarily recognize it. Um, and in my experience, a lot of people with OCD are scared to tell people what they're thinking because sometimes the thoughts do feel really taboo, or like I said, they can feel really bizarre, and that in and of itself is really isolating.
Mm-hmm. So this kind of like fear of rejection, reprisal, that kind of thing, or is it more kind of
Um, it can be fear of rejection, and sometimes that is coming from just a really real place of there are things I think culturally that are considered more taboo than others. Sometimes that fear in and of itself is part of OCD. So it's if people knew that I had this, they might reject me, they might judge me. I'm going to end up alone. You something with OCD fears is they tend to go 0 to 100 pretty fast.
mm,
So it's not just people would reject me. You know, if you do a little digging, sometimes it's people will reject me, and that means that I'm going to have to live the rest of my life alone, um, or something similar. It's unique in everybody's experience generally.
yeah. My next question is, like, in your work as a therapist, what have you learned from some of the people that you've worked with? What are some of the common sort of themes, stories?
Hmm. To do with OCD specifically?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to know more on like a thematic level, or do you want to know more kind of on the interpersonal anecdotal level?
I mean, whichever way, I mean, I think whichever way works. I think,
I could speak to either, to be honest. Thematically, so that would be more of like OCD subtypes. So schools of thought that tend to show up for people. So I've worked a lot with a lot of harm OCD. So that's like fears. What if I harm myself? What if I do something to harm other people? Um, and in some instances, that's like suicidal. Like, what if I want to kill myself? Right. And usually those people don't want to kill themselves. It's this fear, what if I did? Um, I worked with a lot of people around relationship OCD. So the just uncertainty. So I think I can really sum up different themes in OCD as relating to two areas, risk and uncertainty. So risk is what if I get hurt? What if I get sick? What if I hurt somebody else? What if my life goes down the toilet because I don't do things correctly, right? Um, what and uncertainty is, how do I know? So how do I know that I'm taking the right path? How do I know that I'm with the right person? How do I know that these things that I'm doing to protect everyone are really going to protect them? Um, so most subtypes can really be boiled down to that. Um, what if I did something horrific? Um, More anecdotally, I don't know. I get really excited about
Hmm.
working with people who have OCD just because I generally end up really liking them as people.
Hmm.
And they come from all sorts of different backgrounds. So it's really hard to look, they're people of all different genders, all different ages. Some people don't get diagnosed with OCD until they're in their 50s or 60s,
Hmm.
and they've had it their whole life, and they thought like this is just normal. Um, I don't work with kids, but there are kids who get treatment for OCD, and I yeah, I usually just love working with them. Obviously, part of the trademark, the diagnosis is they think a lot, and that obviously in the context of OCD is really painful. But if you think about just kind of the way that people are, like some people are big thinkers. They spend a lot of time thinking, they enjoy it. And I really like helping people get to a point where they feel like they can enjoy thinking, like they don't have
Hmm.
to dread it.
Yeah. Like, cause also like, there's also this idea of like, cause social media is really prevalent now, and oftentimes there are a lot of haters out there that say some nasty and mean comments, and so it is social media can be really toxic for those people, right? Like,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. And were you gonna say something? I'm sorry.
Agree. It can definitely be a toxic place. Um, yeah, I mean, are you wondering kind of like how that affects people
Yeah,
or like
yeah.
how I've seen it
Sorry
play out?
if that was confusing.
No, no, you're good. I'm just used to like listening to people talk, and so sometimes I just like wait.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen it for better, I've seen it for worse. Um, Luckily, I feel like it's usually been for better. Um, but that's just my experience.
Uh-huh.
Um, my experience, because honestly, when I'm working with people who have a diagnosis of OCD, there's a part of me that really wishes I could get everybody in a room together, um, so that they could understand that they're not the only one. And that's something that social media does provide, is it provides them access to other people that are experiencing similar things to them. And that is usually helpful in my experience for people. Um, I understand like logically how it can be harmful. It's because, like you said, there's a lot of haters out there. Um, but uh, I I think that a lot of people find it to be validating. And there's some sources that are super reliable out there, like No CD posts a lot. I mean, they push like their treatment platform quite a bit, but they also just put a lot of information about OCD out on social media.
Mm-hmm. My next question is what are you hoping to learn in terms of something new as a mental health professional? What are some of the things that you're curious about or interested in learning more about?
That's a good question. Um, I'm always interested in learning more about um, the mind-body connection. Um, and I think as an OCD therapist, I am really interested about the emergence of that as a disorder because as we understand it right now, we acknowledge there are a lot of different factors. Like there could be environmental, genetic, like, biological, maybe even some trauma influence on the development of OCD. But like there's not a lot of really reliable information out there about it. Um, I'm also really interested in like all of these alternative treatments that are or not alternative, but like very new treatments
Hmm.
um like like ketamine assisted psychotherapy. I know nothing about it. I can't recommend it. I can't, but like it's out there. Some people find it really helpful. Um, so I'm really interested to see where all of that goes. Um, I I like my own therapist. I will always, she said something once, and I don't want to misquote her, but she said like everything we cling to will eventually be like snatched away.
Hmm.
So anytime as like a therapist we get super attached to, she meant that just on a broad scale in life, but um, as a therapist, what I look at that as is like anything that we're super excited about and like super involved in, or even really good at or passionate about as far as treatment modality, it's going to change at some point.
Hmm.
So, we used to think that like CBT was the only treatment for, XYZ. And um, we thought that it was helpful for everybody, but, we've learned a lot about how that can be harmful for some people, especially when not done well. Um, it People need more training than we've usually given them in order to do it correctly. And so it's sort of been knocked from the throne that it used to sit on as like the best treatment. So I guess I try not to get too excited or attached to like different ideas. Like or I'm just I'm just excited to be here. I get excited about finding things that help people. Um, and I get excited about uh, the things that people show me are helpful for them.
Hmm. My last question, and I ask all therapists, is for people that are entering the mental health realm, what tips, advice would you give those entering the mental health profession that want to learn more about OCD or that want to learn more about how to get into the mental health profession? What are Maura Winter's tools for success?
My tools for success. Um, think about what environment you want to work in. Think about what you need to be successful and to thrive. Um, it- there will always be people that there will always be people that you can help. So, the way that that's shown up for me is I have a telehealth only practice, right? A lo Some people feel like that's limiting because there are people who want in person, right? But this is what works for me right now in my life. And so I've chosen to prioritize that. So it's okay to have priorities. As far as getting into the mental health field, might be a little bit of a hot take, but don't spend like don't spend an arm and a leg on your schooling. Like I have a lot of student debt, and I think if I could go back and do it again, like obviously I want to go to a school that's consistent with my values and going to teach me the things that I need to know about being a good counselor or therapist. But um, I think I would have prioritized maybe the financial bit a little bit if I had looked back in the past, or if I had a crystal ball and I could look forward. Um, and as far as learning more about OCD, uh, I mean, there are a lot of good books. Uh, there's a lot of good books about OCD out there. Um, do a short training, like spend the money. Uh, spend the money. Usually that's like $100 or less. You can find at least something that goes over the diagnostic criteria, the assessment. What are the different tools you can use to assess? What are the signs you're looking for? What, what differentiates, because at least then you can diagnose it and refer. Like if you
Hmm.
don't know how to treat it, that's
Yeah.
fine. But I would say at least look to like your continuing education resources, get familiar, and then also feel free to reach out to people who are specialists. Like, yeah, sure, some people might not respond, but I've had people reach out to me and ask for consultation, and we end up having really good conversations.
Yeah. And there's also a thing called the internet.
Exactly. Exactly. But the trainings are so important because even though I said it's really simple and we're looking for like these two or three things when we're diagnosing it, it still gets complicated sometimes. So it's good to have like that in person, or like online even, just somebody providing information. And even better if you can ask questions.
Yep. That is true. All is true. All
Yes.
righty.